With that, I'm going to introduce our panelist for the next session, David Belson. David Belson is the Senior Director of Internet Research and Analysis at the Internet Society, and he is focused there on efforts around internet measurement, shutdowns, understanding market trends, and the impact of the growth of the internet across the globe. And before joining Internet Society, David had a very similar role with Oracle's Internet Intelligence team. And prior to that, he spent over 18 years in Akamai, and some of you are probably familiar with David's name from the State of the Internet report, which was Akamai's quarterly report series that he was kind of leading there. So with that, David, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Great, Archana. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Next slide. There we go. Over the next half hour, I'm privileged to be leading a panel to talk about internet resiliency during COVID-19. It's a really interesting topic, and it's something that has really come to the forefront for so many of us over the last several months. Next slide. So in late February, early March, there was a lot of virtual ink spilled as everybody started to work from home and everybody was locked down around concerns that the internet might break. Was all of the increased traffic and the associated latency going to cause a lot of problems? Was it, going to really slow things down? Was it really going to make it hard to watch Netflix videos or to do Zoom conferences or what have you? So a lot of articles out there. Here's a sample of a few of them. And in late February, I had published a blog post on the Internet Society blog called "Is the Internet Resilient Enough to Withstand Coronavirus?" Taking a look at some of the metrics that we needed to watch and see what happened. Next slide. So after a month or so, it became pretty clear that the internet was not going to break. It was able to withstand the strain. It was able to withstand the increased traffic. And I published a follow-up post that said, "Yep, the internet is resilient enough, but there is a catch." And that catch was more related to the digital divide, which is a topic for a separate webinar. But what we're really here today is to talk about how and why the internet was resilient and how it managed to stay up and largely problem free over the last several months. Next slide. So one key reason that the internet was so resilient or is so resilient is because it's a network of networks. There's no single monolithic internet to break. It's a combination of tens of thousands of different types of interconnected networks, mobile providers, last mile providers, backbone networks, academic networks, enterprise networks, internet exchange points, CDN providers, and so on. And to talk about that today, I've got three panelists representing an IXP, a content delivery network, and a last mile community network provider. So Jim Troutman, director at NNENIX, Jana Iyengar, distinguished engineer at Fastly, and Scott Rasmussen, a business development and strategic partnership representative from New York City Mesh. So Jim, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello and good day to all of you in whichever time zone you're attending from. My name is Jim Troutman. I'm a volunteer director and general purpose agitator for NNENIX. We're a small not-for-profit internet exchange serving northern New England, which is Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, if you're not familiar. In our very rural region, NNENIX tries to foster and promote increased internet resiliency and connectivity, higher broadband speeds at lower costs. In our region, it's still common for wholesale internet transit costs to exceed $5 per megabit per month, and there are still large areas where residential broadband is limited to low-speed DSL if it's available at all. My day job is an independent internet infrastructure consultant and IT architect, and I work with a variety of regional ISPs, telcos, and enterprises to help solve their problems.
Cool. Thank you, Jim. Jana, you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. Thank you for bringing me in here, David. Well, my name is Jana Iyengar, and I am a distinguished engineer in the CTO's office at Fastly. Can you put the first slide up, please? Not that one. Anyways, I'll keep going while the slide comes up. So yeah, so I work on a number of things, but primarily on Quick, which we won't be talking about here. But Fastly, as a CDN company, it's basically what we call as an edge cloud platform, which basically means that we have a distributed system that's sitting, we have machines sitting all over the world, and we offer storage as well as compute from those machines. And so you do also perform the services of a traditional CDN. And the data that I'll be showing you today comes from a number of our customers that use the CDN there.
Thanks, Jana. And those are the correct slides. You can hide those again. And finally, Scott, you want to give a quick intro to New York City Mesh?
Sure, absolutely. My name's Scott. I'm an organizer with NYC Mesh. As you mentioned, David, we're a community network based in New York. We connect about 500 buildings across the city. We're a nonprofit, and we believe that the internet is for everyone. So we have volunteers that build out our network. We're entirely run by volunteers and the people who own our network. And together we engage in popular education, network infrastructure building, and other sorts of activities needed to make sure that we can connect New Yorkers no matter what their home looks like or what they're able to afford.
Great, thank you, Scott. So today we want to look at resilience within the panel in three different areas. One is from a traffic perspective. One is from the challenges, so what challenges were faced, and then looking towards the future and looking at how we remain resilient. So the question first question that I have for the panelists is what their traffic levels were like heading into the March lockdowns, and how they changed as a result of the lockdowns being implemented. So Jim, let's look at you first for NNENIX and for the IXP community.
Yes. So NNENIX, we saw quite a large traffic increase. We are small. We have a small number of peers, but we had approximately more than a 2x doubling of traffic. Around the world and in general for IXPs that I've talked with and monitored, everyone saw between 30 to 50% traffic increase during the lockdown. A lot of the IXs ended up deploying an entire year's worth of bandwidth upgrades and planned expansions in a matter of a month or two, just to be able to keep up with demand.
Great. And Jana, what about Fastly? What kind of traffic increases did Fastly see?
Yeah, so I have some data to show. If we can get the first Fastly, not the Fastly slide, but the data slide up. We definitely saw increases, and we actually published a blog post about this in, I can't remember, May it was. So you look up the Fastly blog page, you'll see that the slide before this. So I'll start with the, if you can.
Not that one. Go back to the New York, New Jersey slide.
That's fine. Yeah, I can pick it up from there. That's fine. So basically, one of the things that you see here is that. So there's a lot going on this slide, and this is basically one of the deep dive slides. So I won't go into detail here. Just very broadly speaking, what we tried to do was we looked at internet traffic at our from our POPs. We looked at how traffic volume was increasing and how what we measured as download speed. We basically measured at our servers, we were measuring TCP delivery rate, and we measured that as a proxy for what download speed users were experiencing. And we looked at what happened to that when those connections were going to particular parts of the world. And so this one is looking at just New York and New Jersey. The red curve that you see there is basically the hockey stick. Unfortunate COVID cases increase that happened over time. The blue curve that you see rising up slowly is the traffic level increase that we saw in traffic going to New York and New Jersey, that region of the world. And the green curve down below that's decreasing, these are all percentage changes from just an arbitrary point. That shows download speed as we measured it. Now, you can see that traffic levels are definitely increasing. And as a result, we saw some of the download speed decrease, but it didn't completely go down. It went down at a much lower rate than the traffic increases. And we also see that it's sort of, towards the end, there's some recuperation. There's some improvement happening there on the download speed, despite the fact that traffic increases continued to happen through the end of March. Can you go to the next slide?
That was good to see then from the fact that the download speeds didn't drop significantly, I think certainly speaks to the resilience of the network infrastructure in that area.
Absolutely. And that's something that we saw repeatedly. So if you see the next slide, you'll see a similar trend again. This was in Italy. Again, you see a similar trend. I won't go into the details of various events there. The next slide shows you the UK. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so this shows the UK, and you see similar trends. A couple of things I'll note, because they're interesting, I think. One of the things is that we saw dramatic increases in traffic as school closures were announced, or kids went home, basically, because as children go home, parents go home, everybody goes home, and the traffic that we saw increased, and presumably this was mostly increase in residential areas. We didn't really dig into that much. But you also see that these nice bumps in the UK. Those are weekend bumps, and those disappear. Yeah, those disappear completely. So
yeah, that was something I saw elsewhere as well. Comments from other network providers that the weekend shifts that you normally saw in their traffic went away. It's really interesting. So thank you. And so now that we're 3 or 4 months on from the lockdown orders and school is over, around here we're starting to talk about going back to school. Businesses are gradually starting to reopen. Some of the traffic graphs I've seen out there show that the peaks are kind of back around pre-lockdown levels. So where are your traffic levels at these days? And Jana, I know you guys are a public company. Don't want to get you in trouble with anybody, so I'll give you a pass on this question. But Scott and Jim, if you can, say a few words on where your, the traffic levels that you're seeing now that things are, now that we're a quarter on.
Absolutely. Well, we're a wireless network for the most part. And prior to COVID, we were seeing generally when we do the back of the envelope math to figure out how much bandwidth we need in a particular area or backhaul, we generally average about 2 megabits per second per unit throughout the day. And that's kind of the average that we can operate with. That peaked at about 4.5 megabits per second per day. So we more than doubled kind of usage of our network on a daily basis, and then now it's settled back down to about 3 or so. So we really saw, in the first week or two, an incredible peak of traffic, a lot of emergencies for us and our volunteers, but then things have actually gradually lowered as not only our network kind of optimized itself to be able to meet increased demand, but also I think as things have changed, particularly probably school ending in New York City.
Can I get my slides with the statistics page? The green one. Most of the IXs have seen a little bit of a decrease in traffic. It's not back down to normal levels or levels pre-COVID, because just the growth of internet traffic is always happens.
Can we move ahead 2 slides? There we go. Thank you.
So you can see long-term trends at various IXs around the world. These graphs are from the start of the COVID period, but traffic levels have come down a bit as lockdowns are ending. On my non-IX work on the retail ISP side, definitely seeing that as well. And it's interesting, Scott, that what I see in our very rural area is more like 0.5 megabit to 1 megabit per user instead of 2 to 4. And that's simply because the access last mile isn't there, unfortunately.
Sounds like there's an opportunity for a main mesh up there, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're all in. We're ready.
Yes, we could talk.
Good area up there.
Could I have the next slide, please? And I just wanted to touch on the shape and the difference during COVID. That the bottom left there shows a typical period highlighted. And then during lockdown, the shape of traffic changed. It was basically kind of an all-day peak with a little bit of bumps. Another thing that was interesting, particularly in the IX world, is a lot of the large academic networks, like a lot of the K-12 and university networks, they were basically ghost towns during lockdown. However, they basically became content providers because a lot of people were accessing content and educational things that they provide. So it was an interesting role reversal, and that graph on the right side shows that.
Yeah, and interesting with respect to the K-12 networks, and I don't know if you have any visibility into this, but there were a lot of stories about in certain parts of the U.S. at least where students without network connectivity at home were basically sitting outside.
Absolutely. There was a whole network from car homework from car initiative in Maine. The Maine folks at Network Maine, they actually worked with a lot of the K-12 schools specifically to open up Wi-Fi hotspots and to get people to come in during the lockdown and like move access points close to a window, that sort of thing, just to get some sort of connectivity, because there's literally thousands and thousands of kids that were in lockdown that didn't have internet access at all. Yeah,
and that's where the resilience failed.
Absolutely.
But and which I think is actually a good segue to the challenges question. So were there specific challenges that your organizational infrastructure faced related to the COVID-driven increased usage? Jana, as a CDN provider, I'm sure you guys are very used to sudden peaks in traffic, but can you speak to any of the challenges that Fastly saw?
Yeah, so this is basically what we do. Right. I mean, it's our job to handle these things, and we were able to manage it. And as you saw in the graphs and in various graphs that we're seeing, basically, and as David, you said right at the beginning of this panel as well, it was another day, another sort of sustained peak that we saw for a while, and we were able to take it in our stride. This is, I want to say that this, yes, for Fastly, it definitely was something that we do, that's something that we're good at, and so we were able to do this. But at the same time, it also speaks to the value of a lot of innovation that's happened in the industry over the past 10, 15 years. I don't know if we could have really survived this, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And one of my dear friends and colleagues, Patrick McManus, wrote a blog post about this, about basically the 4 key innovations that has allowed us to be resilient during this time. And I think it's important to recognize the value of all of these things. The standards and the specs of the internet are also designed for reliability, for elasticity, for resilience. And so we continue to build those standards, and they've been tested, and I think they've held up.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. And Scott, can you speak to New York City Mesh?
Sure. I think our biggest challenges were twofold. One, centered on kind of human capacity. In New York, we were under a lockdown, so things like maintenance and the very basic types of things of getting across New York City, a city where most people don't own a car, and you're dependent on public transportation or anything else to schlep equipment across town.
And nobody was rushing to the New York City subways in the middle of COVID.
Exactly. And so we can talk a little bit more about that later, but the issue of kind of human capacity and what we were able to do was significantly limited, and something that was trying for us. The other was spectrum. As I mentioned, we're a wireless network. New York is a very, very busy space in the radio frequency environment. Not only do we have 3 airports that we're operating around, but we have a lot of other users. And something that we found is that a lot more folks were jumping around channels trying to find, open opportunities or spaces that they could operate in to kind of increase bandwidth and meet those needs that we saw immediately after the lockdowns. And as that happens, obviously, then that starts a chain reaction of 10 other users of spectrum that are suddenly reshuffling around and moving around. So we had to be incredibly dynamic in our use. And interestingly, in many ways, it often got down to, again, a human question. We really had RF engineers watching and looking and actually manually selecting channels in which to operate in, because in many cases, things were moving, in some cases too quickly to be able to kind of leave it up to automatically kind of selecting channels. It actually took a lot of human judgment to figure out what was best.
Right, and I guess as a suburban user, I don't think about that much. My stuff just works, but being in a really radio dense environment like New York City, that is definitely a unique challenge. And just building also on something that you mentioned there, talking about having the human capacity and really relying on the human element. My colleague Jane Coffin likes to talk about, it's the human nets that build the net nets. And I think, for you and for everything I've read about New York City Mesh, that really rings true.
I think it's very true for the last mile provider. I mean, so much of our work is in the field, and that we have to be present. We have to be there to be able to do a lot of the maintenance, particularly in the wireless environment, I think. Yeah,
and a lockdown and a pandemic sort of makes it a little bit more challenging to accomplish.
Absolutely.
But it's good to see that your subscribers are willing to share their knowledge and their experience with others.
Right, absolutely.
Help you get the job done.
That's the benefit that we have of being a community network. We're inclusive of everyone. We're not kind of providing a customer service in many ways. We try to increase tech knowledge across the board because we actually understand that our network is more resilient when skills and knowledge are shared across the user base. So the more informed of users that we have on our network, the more resilient our network ultimately is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Jim, can you speak to the IXP industry and NNENIX?
So one of the challenges that I saw across the ISP industry, as well as retail ISPs, was getting circuits delivered and capacity increases. There were a lot of IXs that waived port charges, and basically because this was an emergency, they said, if you need bandwidth, just tell us and we will give it to you and we will sort out the billing later. And there was a lot of very fast new capacity added in terms of additional ports or upgrades to the next level speed. I also saw a lot of the telcos doing things they have never ever been able to do before, where they were turning around circuits that would normally take weeks or months, and they were doing them in a matter of days because everyone really understood that it was an emergency. Some of the retail ISPs were caught short without enough transit capacity, so there was a lot of additional transit orders. And definitely there were some new entrants into the world of peering. One of the things I wanted to point out that's still a problem is there's still insufficient peering, particularly when it comes to corporate VPN traffic versus home traffic. There's still way too many instances where your VPN traffic back to your office, and a lot of people still have to do that. They're not all in the cloud. That traffic sometimes is going hundreds of miles or thousands of miles, tromboning out of the next major market because that's where the two entities peer. So more local peering, please.
And what's the impact of the trombone routing there?
Increased latency, more packet loss, slower VPN experience. I mean, people have adjusted and have, gotten used to working from home primarily, and there's still a lot of people that are. And as everyone says, this is the new normal. Yep. But if there was more peering, I think the VPN experience would be a lot nicer.
Great, cool. And then just to close it out, talking about the future, building on the points we've just made, do you feel your organizations and your infrastructure is sufficiently resilient in order to capably handle that next unexpected surge in traffic? Again, as a CDN provider, Jana, the answer there is probably yes. But and I think one final question of, is there a key lesson from the experiences in your organization over the last few months that you're willing to share with the industry and your industry colleagues? So Scott, we'll start with you.
Sure, absolutely. I'd say, our network, we scraped by as much as humanly possible, because our job, we're not only do we have a shoestring budget, but we also our goal is to have a neutral network. And so we're not out here throttling data or anything like that. So we're trying to get everything we can out the door as quickly as possible with respect to bandwidth. So with respect to our network and how it holds up, there were a lot of challenges. We're in the process right now of installing a lot better equipment, larger antennas, things like that, and doing a lot of the back-end maintenance work. We learned a lot from the process. And but with respect to lessons learned, I think two lessons really kind of came to mind in thinking about this. The first is the importance of investing in human capacity, and that's what I was mentioning earlier is incredibly important for us. And that's what the back end of so much of this is still run by network engineers and people doing the work on the ground. And the other, I guess, is really thinking that though remote is all the rage, and many of us, including myself, are all working from home these days, local really is important. And we realized that, and that we had to have people in the field local to where the problems existed. We couldn't have somebody, for us, taking subway across town wasn't a possibility. So we had to have groups of volunteers or people who are able to walk up the block or do something like that to be able to do that kind of maintenance. And I think also, it gets to Jim's point earlier, I think also local is very true with respect to peering. With the traffic going over our network, if we can keep a maximum amount of that traffic locally within the network or directly with somebody we're peering with in a local exchange, that makes a huge difference for end users. So not only kind of having people and capacity local, but also traffic local. Absolutely.
And Jim?
I'll agree totally with Scott on the people and in general. Challenges is, lessons learned. Access to facilities is very important and was a challenge during COVID for different reasons than some of Scott's reasons. A lot of the facilities were essentially unmanned and had severely restricted access, and access was essentially by appointment only. A lot of data center facilities, and I know this affected other IXs, those data centers maybe had one technician, and so getting remote hands requests was basically impossible, or you had a very long wait. So those are, issues for the future. And always, more capacity, more peering, always going to say more peering.
And hopefully a lot of organizations now are revisiting their disaster recovery plans and their disaster,
business continuity.
Thank you. The DRBC plans and incorporating things like what happens when there's only one guy in the data center. Or what happens when we can't get into our data center. And maybe that's when we start relying more on CDN services. So Jana, we'll close it out with you.
So basically, like you said, as a CDN, having a CDN helps, right? I mean, so my heart goes out to those who had to scale their services overnight, but didn't have that to back them up. But so in terms of looking to the future, we've been investing in infrastructure, in capacity. We recently announced that we've reached 100 terabits of serving capacity, and more broadly around the internet. We want to build a technology that can help us move forward like this. So we're investing in technologies like Quick, various things that can actually help us move into the next level of internet use, so to speak, and to manage these things. In terms of the lessons learned, I have to say that there's something resonates with me when I heard Jim talk about how people stepped up to do stuff right here during these times. So we just a very quick prelude is that we dug into the data that I showed you earlier to see if different communities were getting affected disproportionately. Specifically within the US, we tried to dig in and see if poorer communities were getting more affected than richer communities. And the way we did this, we looked at five-digit zip codes. We looked at the average income from IRS data, and we correlated that with delivery rate to those particular zip codes. And while we didn't see a big difference in how much they were affected, what we found was quite stark in that we found that across the board, even before pre-COVID, delivery rates were completely striated. Like, the richest neighborhoods got the highest delivery rates and the poorest neighborhoods got the lowest delivery rates. And it was perfectly stratified. We had 5 levels that we classified the 5-digit zip codes into, and we got 5 curves of delivery rates. And that was just very stark. The really cool thing is that operators have stepped up. They did step up. So Comcast and Cox Communications, I'll call them out because they did something really good here. They came out and they offered the Internet Basics program for free for a while, and they also increased the bandwidth of those programs, and that actually showed in our data. We saw these striations, like, we had these 5 lines, and the bottom 2 sort of went up, and the gap sort of disappeared for those ISPs at least. So the lesson here is that we can continue doing this. There is a digital divide. We know that there's disproportionate people who are getting disproportionately affected, and that we as a community can actually step up and do something here. We can take that lesson out of this.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a great point to end on. I think the internet has remained resilient thanks to the work of CDNs and last mile providers and IXPs. I think that where we need to focus on improving the resilience is by closing that digital divide. It's going to require a lot of work, a lot of investment, and it's going to require a lot of investment not only in hardware and in bandwidth, but also in human capacity. Like Jim and Scott said, having the right people in the right place at the right time. So I want to thank Jim and Scott and Jana for participating in the panel today. I want to thank the team at Thousand Eyes for having us, and turn it back to Arkana and Angelique.
Thanks, David. That was great. In particular, the discussion around access and really paying attention to that, in particular because, as Jana mentioned, like some of these trends that they were seeing existed pre-COVID and even, afterwards. And there were some providers who stepped up. But if anybody is interested in learning more about this, isn't that part of some of the work that the Internet Society is involved in?
Absolutely, yeah. We do a lot of work around both community networks, helping to foster and to build community networks around the world, as well as shepherding IXP deployments in various locations, trying to help keep that traffic local. So the Internet Society website has a lot of information on both project areas.
Great. And hopefully you and some of the guests can stick around for questions at the end. There was a lot of really interesting topics you guys brought up. And thank you again, David.
Sure, you're welcome. Thanks for